everybody, and welcome back to Profiles in Canada, the Scouts Canada series, where we connect with Canadians who use their talents for the common good. And frankly, there is no better example of this than our guest. It's a true honor to have Minister Allan with us today. I'm Kaelem Moniz, your host. Let me just begin by talking a little bit about Minister Rock. I will say he is one of our guests whose CV is probably longer than the time we have together, but here are the highlights. Between 1993 and 2003, Allan Rock was the Justice Minister and Attorney General of Canada. Then he was the Health Minister. Then he was the Minister of Industry. After that, he was Canada's ambassador or representative, permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, and that was for 3 years. And then after that, Ambassador Rock became President Rock of the University of Ottawa until his term ended in 2016. I will say, having represented Etobicoke Centre for a decade, Minister Rock's constituents include many Scout groups in the Greater Toronto Council. So, Minister, Ambassador, and President Rock, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's great to be here, Kaelem. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So, Allan, I'll start off with a question that maybe you can confirm for me. I read online that you have an interesting story about meeting John Lennon, as in the Beatle, the rock star, during his bed-in in Montreal. Maybe you want to provide some comment on that. That seems interesting.
That's true. It's a fabulous memory. At the time, I was president of the Students' Association at the University of Ottawa, where I was in law school. And I read in the newspaper that John and Yoko were in Montreal doing a bed-in for peace at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel. So I thought it'd be great to have him come onto the campus at University of Ottawa. I called, finally got through to him, went down to speak to him. He agreed to come. So we brought him to Ottawa, and I spent the most spectacular day with him. We had a conference on world peace at which he was the main speaker. It wasn't much of a conference. It was actually sort of a news conference with him present. It attracted a big crowd. It was very exciting. And after that, he wanted to see some of the city of Ottawa. So I put him in the back of my Volkswagen, and a friend of mine and I drove him and Yoko around Ottawa, including to the Prime Minister's residence to see whether Pierre Trudeau was in. He wasn't, unfortunately. But I spent hours with him, and I enjoyed his company so much. He was down to earth, no airs about him, didn't behave like an egotistical rock star. He behaved like a humble, natural human being. It was great to meet him and spend time with him. And as I say, it's a wonderful memory.
That's incredible, Allan. So I'll ask then, because obviously then you were the student body president of the University of Ottawa. Did you always know that governance was in your future?
No, I didn't. I thought law was in my future, and in fact, it was. When I got out of law school, I articled in Toronto at a big firm. Now it's one of the biggest in the country. And I spent 23 years at that law firm as a trial lawyer. So that was my main interest. My real desire was to get in front of a judge and a jury, cross-examine witnesses, marshal the facts, make my argument like I'd seen on television so often. I found that just a thrilling opportunity to persuade, to act on behalf of somebody as a lawyer, defending their rights, advancing their interest, putting their case before the court. And that's what I did for 23 years until 1993, when I got involved in electoral politics.
That's incredible. And you carried on, obviously, your lawyering as the Justice Minister, the Attorney General, the top lawyer in the country, essentially. And actually, I want to talk about that briefly, because when you were Justice Minister, you were a leader in reforming the criminal code to be more mindful of Indigenous rights issues, the Human Rights Act to prevent discrimination based on sexual orientation in the workplace, for example. Human rights was clearly at the core of your agenda as Justice Minister. Why was that so important to you? And I wonder if you might provide comment on that.
I always regarded the role of the Attorney General of Canada, the Minister of Justice, as being the chief guardian for the rights of Canadians. You know, every time the government of Canada tables legislation in the House of Commons, it's necessary for the Justice Minister to sign a certificate saying that that legislation complies with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Wow. So the Justice Minister or Attorney General is always conscious of the rights of Canadians, conscious of human rights, worried about any intrusion on those human rights or any threat to them, and also interested in any legislation or policies that are necessary to protect human rights. So it was in that capacity that we changed the Human Rights Code in Canada to, as you say, to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation in the workplace, and a whole raft of other things that we're very proud of. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I wonder if you might briefly just touch upon, obviously, we have young viewers from across the country who might be tuning in right now, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and maybe just talk about that briefly as it pertains to your role.
Yes, of course. Our Constitution includes the Charter, which is a statement of the rights that every Canadian is entitled to. In fact, they're guaranteed under the
Mm,
Charter. These are rights of association, rights, freedom of expression, freedom of religion. They're protection against arbitrary acts by government.
mm,
And these rights were enshrined in our Constitution over 40 years ago. And
mm.
since that time, they've been interpreted and applied by the courts, and they really have become one of the cornerstones of Canadian citizenship. And, surveys done by pollsters over the last 15, 20 years have shown one of the things Canadians are most proud of, one of the things that they identify most closely with Canadian citizenship is our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It has gone from being a constitutional document at a theoretical plane to becoming an integral part of Canadian life. And governments, both provincial and federal, don't do anything without making sure that it's consistent with the rights and freedoms guaranteed to every citizen by that charter. So it's of fundamental importance to who we are as a nation.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I find it very interesting. And maybe folks at home, if they're so interested, can Google it, that it was in 1982 when the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was put into law, even though we've been a country since 1867. Maybe that's a good one for the history classes back at home. But I want to keep moving to talk about your advocacy for human rights because obviously this was essential to your agenda as the ambassador to the United Nations, or more accurately, the permanent representative of Canada to the United Nations in New York between 2003 and 2006. And you advanced an agenda called the responsibility to protect. I wonder if you might provide some comments on what R2P means. Why was it so essential for Canada's international policy? And you accomplished it being formally adopted in 2005. How was that able to happen?
R2P is sort of shorthand for responsibility to protect. And it really is an achievement of Canada and the government of Canada. What happened is this, Kaelem. In 1994, the history books will show that there was a terrible genocide in Rwanda.
Mm,
800,000 citizens were slaughtered within the space of 100 days as one tribe turned on another and tried to exterminate all of them. The
wow.
world was shocked. It was in disbelief, but the world failed because nobody intervened to stop it.
Wow.
A few years later, in the Balkans, during the war in the former Yugoslavia, there was another mass atrocity. It was an ethnic cleansing, and it occurred with the mass murder of people of one sect just because of who they were. And that was followed, of course, by many atrocities on other continents around the world. And the United Nations needed a doctrine to determine when there would be intervention to stop a mass atrocity. It didn't exist.
Mm,
Secretary General Kofi Annan asked the General Assembly in 1999 to consider and adopt such a policy. And in response, the government of Canada, particularly my friend and former colleague in cabinet, Lloyd Axworthy, who was then foreign minister, created an international commission to consider this question. They produced a report called Responsibility to Protect. The key issue was that sovereign states have rights as states, but they also have responsibilities. And the first and most important one is to protect their own citizens from mass murder.
mm.
If they're unable or unwilling to respect that responsibility, then the international community will intervene to save the population and stop the violence. That's the principle we put before the General Assembly. And in 2005, at a global summit, The doctrine was unanimously adopted by the United Nations. Now, I'm sad to tell you that in the intervening 20 years, the doctrine has been rarely invoked. We've seen atrocities and genocides in Myanmar and elsewhere around the world. There's one going on right now in Sudan. We saw one last year or 2 years ago in Tigray in
Mm.
Ethiopia. So the Security Council has not complied with the doctrine, has not done its own job, has not met its own responsibility. But the principle is there, it's been established, it's been adopted unanimously by all the member states of the UN, and Canada deserves a great deal of credit for developing the doctrine.
Canada has traditionally had a leadership role in advancing human rights on the world stage. Why is that so important? Why do you think Canada is uniquely suited to play that role?
And you're right. That goes right back to the days when Canadian John Humphrey worked with Eleanor Roosevelt in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was
Mm.
adopted in 1948 by the United Nations.
Well,
And over the years since, whether it's through national or provincial legislation, whether it's by creating human rights commissions and tribunals, we have sought to recognize and enforce human rights. We've also been an advocate on the world stage for other nations to respect human rights. We've done that through all of the organizations in which we've been involved, from the Commonwealth to La Francophonie
mm,
to the United Nations itself. And I think it reflects the very values that we have as a country, the values that are expressed in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Those are Canadian values. And to Canadians, it's important that human rights everywhere be respected. So I think it's just part of our nature. It comes with our citizenship, and it's a proud heritage.
yeah. You mentioned citizenship, and I know that at home, many young people, or maybe there are parents watching this right now, or maybe there are volunteers watching this right now, are interested in how they can further develop their citizenship or how to become more involved in the civic community. I wonder if you might provide some advice to young people or even to parents or to volunteers who are interested in getting more involved in knowing about our democratic processes and knowing about how Canada's governance works.
I'm always reluctant to give advice to younger people because it's a bit presumptuous on my part. Younger people these days are very astute, and I think they understand exactly how to meet their responsibilities as citizens. But
Mm,
let me just speak from my own experience and with humility offer some observations from my own life. I think the first and most important thing is to become informed,
mm,
to notice what's going on, to read the news, the real news, not the fake news, to get the best quality of information you can, to learn about our government and how it works, how it's supposed to work, and to be vigilant in monitoring what's going on in your name when the government acts here at home or around the world. So
mm,
being informed is part of it. The second thing I would say is to become involved. And when I say become involved, I don't necessarily mean run for parliament. There's so
mm,
many ways of becoming involved. There's joining a parent teachers association, there's joining a community group, there's getting involved in the food bank or in any other ways around your city, your province, and your country. Becoming involved adds a dimension to life which is very rewarding. I always found that although I was practicing law, sometimes 18 hours a day, it
wow,
was the work I did beyond that in the community that I found sometimes the most fulfilling and rewarding. And the last thing I would say is, it's hard to say, well, my plan is to become Prime Minister of Canada or my plan is to become ambassador to the UN. It's hard to construct a plan with those specific objectives in mind. But you can do what you hear. Sometimes you hear professional golfers saying, my ambition is to put myself in a position where
mm,
on Sunday, in the last day of the tournament, I'm in contention. So if you're interested in those positions, I think the idea is to put yourself in line for them by conducting a life, accumulating experience, and having insights into our country that would make you eligible for that kind of job. Those are the observations I would have.
Oh, that's fantastic, Alan. And I will say, given the experiences and roles you've had, I'd say you'd be forgiven if you had a lack of humility, which of course you do not. I want to finish off maybe then with just one last question, if you don't mind, on that subject. Oftentimes, young people will become informed, as you said, of uh, problems impacting their community, impacting their country, impacting the world, and they want to know what they can do to make a difference. They want to know what they can do to give back. I wonder if you, of course, if you might offer some advice, again, to those sorts of youth who are looking to give back to their communities, looking to become more active on that front, where can they start?
Well, it was Thurgood Marshall, a former justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, who said, the highest office in a democracy is the office of citizen.
Hmm.
And by that, I'm sure he meant that every citizen shares in the collective responsibility to make sure that our democracy is safe, that our government is acting in accordance with human rights, and that there's justice, social justice, and fairness in society. And for those who are interested in getting involved, making a difference, I think there are myriad ways in your own community, whether it's non-governmental organizations, community groups, or associations, um, ways by which you can involve yourself and devote your energy to a cause that's important to you. That cause might be maintaining the quality of education. It might be making sure there's enough financing for our healthcare system. It might be worrying about the human rights of a minority group that are being discriminated against. But whatever the cause, when you become involved, when you become active with community groups or associations, it gives you an opportunity to make the difference you want to see, to make a contribution, and to fulfill the responsibilities of the highest office in a democracy.
Well, what an awesome note to leave off on. Alan, Minister, Ambassador, President, thank you so much for being with us today. I know that your words will leave an inspiring impact on our audience. And of course, for your leadership with Canada on the world stage. To everybody at home, thank you so much for joining us for another awesome episode. Our next episode is going to be next week, and it's going to be with another Canadian who uses their talents to the fullest in pursuit of the common good. So I look forward to seeing you then, and thank you again, Alan, for being here with us.
Thank you, Caleb. So long.
All right, cheers, everybody.